Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals, and today we are going to be talking about risers, but specifically what is, in my opinion, the worst riser of all time. This is the GBRS Hydra Mount. Now, this is a real Hydra Mount, not one of those AliExpress knockoffs that you can find for like 60, 70 bucks. I would never recommend that you save $250 on an overpriced product by sourcing them from China. I wouldn't do that. But before we get into that, while you're here, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as that is free and it does help us out quite a bit. And go ahead and comment your favorite ridiculous spaceship-looking riser in the comments down below. Now, full disclosure, I did not pay anything for this riser, as I would not buy one of these. However, Andrew Vachon, frequent donator to the channel, did and sent it to me to play around with. Now, this has a very specific application that is not on an AR, which we'll talk about a little bit later. There is one excuse for this type of thing, and it is probably not the thing that you see it on the most. Now, getting into some specifics on the GBRS Hydra, these go for the mid $300 range, which is very, very overpriced for about $12 worth of aluminum. And these can be had in both the Aimpoint and Aimpoint Duty style footprints, depending on height, both EOTech height variations and the Trijicon MRO. So yes, they do make a version for whatever optic it is that you want to put on one of these. For whatever reason, you might want to do that. Talking about material specs for just a second, this is the first miss for me personally, as it is made out of 6061 rather than the stronger 7075, which 7075 is about 1.5 times as strong per ounce than 6061, so it is the cheaper, weaker material that's a little bit easier to machine, which makes sense because there's a lot that they have to machine off of this. In terms of weight, these are a little bit over 6 ounces, which means you're basically doubling the weight of whatever red dot you choose to mount it to. And of course, that is for the riser itself and the diving board for your laser aiming module, light, whatever it might be that you're stacking in front of it. While I certainly think that the material choice is subpar, I will say that the machining work is quite good, and the way that it clamps onto your rail, you have 2 large cross bolts and 2 very, very tight tolerance recoil lugs on the bottom of the riser that lock into your upper receiver quite well. So in terms of the mounting solution and the machining, that's all quite good. Now let's go ahead and get into use case and positives, real or imaginary. The first thing that this obviously does is conjoin your optic with your laser aiming module, meaning that you do not have to mount your laser aiming module out front on whatever rail you may have happened to be attached to your weapon of choice, which means that you're not reliant on that rail to hold zero, only the mount itself. So a lot of weapon systems out there, specifically like the SIG MPX, where the handguards are just known to not hold zero on a multi-$1,000 platform for some reason. SIG has a hard time with basically all of their handguards on their modern firearms for some reason. The Desert Tech Wolverine, its stock handguard, doesn't hold zero, and a lot of other flimsy rails out there that just don't do what they're supposed to do. So this can be a fix for those solutions. Of course, by mounting the laser aiming module much further back, it also does positively affect the balance by not putting that pound, in certain cases, out at the front of your rifle and bringing it back. Another possible use case for this is if you're setting it up on a real estate limited setup where, say, you only have 4 or 5 inches of pick in total, you might not be able to slam together your optic mount plus your lamb, so you might need to resort to something like this to actually fit everything onto your system. Think a B&T TP9 or something similar to that, where you're very, very limited on rail space. So to put all of your accoutrements that you want on your system, you might need something like that to actually get that done. As far as I'm concerned, those are really the only tangible benefits that actually manifest in reality. If your rail for some reason doesn't hold zero, this solves that problem. Brings the weight a lot further back. That's nice. Or if you simply don't have enough real estate to get all your stuff on there, this can solve that problem. And really, that's about it as far as the positives go. Now, a lot of the other things that I'm just going to call BS on are when the owners of these, GBRS, who are former Navy SEALs, they've done a lot of cool things. Doesn't mean I agree with them in terms of their shooting prowess, performance, or opinions on that type of thing. But another thing people keep harping on is that if you really need to shoot quickly and accurately at speed, well, you need that heads-up display. You need a tall 3-inch riser, because I believe the center line of this optic is about 3 inches in this current configuration, and so you really need that to be a true speed CQB operator. However, I just don't think that's the case whatsoever. So with the Hydra installed, you basically have a chin weld and you have reduced contact with the system itself, which is going to mean that you necessarily shoot worse. There is a reason why all speed shooters, every single one that I can possibly think of or have seen, will not run something like this in competition, where they are quite literally the fastest and the most accurate at speed in close distances, because of 2 things. One of that is going to be reduced connection to the system, which by definition will mean that you have reduced recoil control, you have reduced index, it's less repeatable because there's less physical meat of your body touching the system. And number 2 is height over bore. The standard height over bore with a lower 1/3 or absolute co-witness red dot is about 2.6 inches on an AR-15. However, with something like the Hydra installed, that goes to over 4 inches height over bore. Now, why does that matter? The height over bore is essentially the difference between your optic and your actual bore at close distances. So think 5 to 7 yards in these quote-unquote CQB distances. Your offset now needs to be about that tall to actually make accurate hits on targets. Now, if you're shooting only huge open targets, that doesn't really matter. However, if you're shooting at a sliver of a target, at 20 yards, you're aiming above in space in no man's land and just hoping you get a hit. Whereas something that is smaller, your error, your height over bore, is much less, therefore making all of those calculations faster and simpler with something that is simply not so ridiculously tall. For instance, up close, in a course that I set up specifically to demonstrate that while you can still use it, of course, it's just annoying to be aiming far over the target to actually get hits up close, which means that you can be less target focused because you know that that dot has to be in a different spot. And for me personally, somebody who is essentially just a gamer dude that likes to shoot quickly and accurately up close, something like the Hydra, something that's supposed to help you for that, is simply worse to use in every aspect. I have to be much more intentional and much more focused about where that dot is in relation to the thing I actually want to hit, rather than just being focused on the thing that I actually want to hit with a lower riser, which is, again, if you look at any of the top guys, they're basically not running anything taller than a 193. Now, I do prefer to have my head a little bit further up, but I still like my cheek to be touching the gun, not my beard. For instance, here on this BRN 180, I have a Geisley 193 mount, which is 1/3 the cost and still tall enough for most people, and that includes NVG use. Something that I will say is a 193 or even a lower 1/3 is perfectly usable with most people with nods, unless you have some sort of condition that means that you can't bend your neck. And so again, with the 193 mount, I still have a very comfortable, very connected position where I have a full cheek weld on the gun and I get a great sight picture through it. Now, another thing that people like to claim about the Hydra mount is that you get a heads-up display and your peripheral vision is just much better when your head is up versus down. And let me tell you that your head being here versus here versus here, there is absolutely no difference in your peripheral vision whatsoever. That's nonsense. So again, with the Hydra mount, you've gained basically nothing. You don't have any extra peripheral vision, but you have sacrificed connection to the gun, and you've complicated your height over bore, which is, again, two of the things that it's supposed to help with, right? You're supposed to be faster and more accurate and be your CQB footwork master race person. But I think all of that is basically marketing nonsense based off of $1,500 CQB courses and not actually based in reality. If it were marketed for PDWs or for reduced real estate platforms or for use with gas masks where you actually do need to have your head far and away, and that was its main intended purpose, not fast and accurate, because again, I just don't think it does either of those things particularly well, but if they just marketed it towards its actual strength rather than its shooting performance and then, showed guys shooting mediocrely on the range, I think it would make a lot more sense. The second part of the equation, of course, for me, is that it's expensive and it doesn't really do anything for me personally since I shoot guns that rails actually work on rather than systems that don't, like whatever SIG product you can come up with. That being said, do I think all risers are bad? Well, of course not. I use them on a lot of systems. There are some conveniences to having everything mounted to one singular package, but you just have to make sure that it actually makes sense for your application rather than the fact that you may be bought into some marketing hype by some cool guys online with some snappy editing. But with all that out of the way, gentlemen, let me know what you think of risers and Hydra mounts and all sorts of silly things in the comments down below. And with all that out of the way, gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.